The massive lecture hall at Centauri Prime University hummed with energy as hundreds of young beings from across the galaxy found their seats. The air itself seemed to vibrate with different breathing patterns, chittering sounds, and the soft glow of bioluminescent students. Some floated slightly above their chairs, others coiled their serpentine bodies around the specially designed seating, and a few simply stood on powerful legs that could crush stone. Professor Veltan commanded attention without effort. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his golden scales caught the artificial sunlight streaming through the dome above. His species, the Saurian Collective, were known for their ancient wisdom and careful study of the galaxy's countless worlds. When he spoke, his forked tongue tasted the air between words, a habit that somehow made everything he said seem more important. Today marks a special day in our Introduction to Planetary Sciences course, Veltan announced, his voice carrying easily across the vast space. Each of you will share the remarkable features of your homeworld. Consider this both education and celebration of our incredible diversity. The excitement in the room was obvious. Students straightened in their seats, energy fields flickered brighter, and several species made sounds that could only be described as eager anticipation. This was their chance to shine, to show off the incredible adaptations and environments that had shaped their people for millions of years. Jake Thompson sat in the very back row, almost hidden behind a particularly large student whose rocky exterior looked like a small mountain. At 21 years old, Jake was typical for his species in almost every way imaginable. Average height, brown hair that never quite stayed in place, and the kind of unremarkable features that would blend into any crowd on Earth. He wore simple clothes, carried a basic data pad, and possessed no visible weapons or defensive modifications. The presentations began with tremendous fanfare. The crystalline quartz beings took the stage first, their bodies refracting light into beautiful rainbow patterns as they spoke. Their homeworld, they explained with obvious pride, was a vast desert of living silicon where temperatures reached levels that would instantly vaporize most organic life. They absorbed energy directly from their twin suns and could survive for centuries without any external resources. The audience gasped appropriately at images of their stunning crystal cities rising from endless dunes of pure quartz. Next came the amphibious tide walkers, whose presentation literally made waves as they demonstrated their ability to control water with thought alone. Their ocean world had no land masses whatsoever, just endless seas with crushing depths that reached down 40,000 feet. They had built magnificent cities in trenches so deep that the pressure would flatten most spacecraft like tin cans. Their gills fluttered with pride as they showed footage of their people swimming gracefully through environments that would kill other species instantly. The energy-based spark folk followed, crackling with electricity as they described their homeworld orbiting directly around a pulsar. They fed on radiation that would fry the nervous systems of most life forms and could travel at near light speed by converting their bodies into pure energy. Their cities were built inside the coronas of stars, places where matter itself broke down into component atoms. Each presentation seemed to top the last. The insectoid hive mind showed their world where trillion-member colonies worked as single organisms, building structures that dwarfed anything else in the galaxy. The gaseous cloud dancers demonstrated how they rode solar winds between planets, never needing solid ground or even physical form. The rock-based granite clan had evolved on a world with gravity so intense that they were essentially living mountains, capable of withstanding forces that would crush starships. As each group finished, the applause grew more enthusiastic. Students were clearly trying to outdo each other, showcasing abilities and adaptations that seemed impossible. Some could survive in the vacuum of space, others could phase through solid matter, and a few could manipulate time itself on a small scale. Then Professor Veltan called Jake's name. The chattering in the lecture hall barely decreased. If anything, it seemed to get slightly louder as students continued their excited conversations about the amazing presentations they had just witnessed. Jake stood up slowly, gathering his simple materials, and made his way down to the presentation area. Several students didn't even bother to look in his direction. Humans were, after all, the most ordinary species anyone had ever encountered. They had joined the galactic community only recently and brought nothing particularly impressive to the table. No natural weapons like claws or venomous fangs. No defensive capabilities like armored skin or energy shields. No special senses that could detect things beyond normal perception. They couldn't fly, couldn't breathe underwater for extended periods, couldn't survive in extreme temperatures or radiation levels. They were just soft, fragile creatures from some unremarkable planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Jake reached the holographic projector and inserted his data chip. The familiar blue-green sphere of Earth appeared above his head, slowly rotating to show the swirling white clouds and brown continents that he had grown up seeing in textbooks. Earth, Jake said simply, his voice steady but not particularly commanding. This is my home. A few students glanced up politely, but most continued their conversations. This was clearly going to be another routine presentation about some garden world with pleasant weather and abundant resources. Everyone knew that humans came from the kind of comfortable, easy planet that produced soft, comfortable, easy species. Jake looked out at the sea of disinterested faces and allowed himself a small smile. They had no idea what was coming. Jake pressed the control on his data pad, and the peaceful image of Earth was replaced by a series of numbers that made several students blink in confusion. He pointed to the first measurement displayed in the holographic space above his head. Earth has a surface gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared, he said in the same casual tone someone might use to mention the weather. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as students began doing quick calculations in their heads. The quartz beings, despite their crystalline nature, actually weighed very little on their homeworld due to the low gravity. The cloud dancers had never experienced anything close to that kind of gravitational pull. Even the sturdy granite clan came from a world where the gravity was only about 60% of what Jake was describing. Professor Veltan's golden scales flickered slightly, a sign of surprise among his people. That's nearly double the galactic average, he said slowly, as if testing the words. Yeah, it keeps us grounded, Jake replied with what might have been a joke, though his expression remained perfectly serious. But that's just the beginning. Our atmospheric pressure at sea level would crush most of your respiratory systems. A nervous ripple went through the amphibious tide walkers section. Their bodies were designed for pressure, but they had specialized organs that could adjust gradually. The idea of living constantly under that kind of atmospheric weight seemed impossible. And speaking of our seas, Jake continued, pulling up an image of Earth's ocean coverage, they cover 71% of the planet's surface with an average depth of 12,000 feet. Ripple, the tide walker representative, made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a bubble. Her people were master ocean dwellers, but their deepest cities only went down 3,000 feet. The pressure at 12,000 feet would be crushing even for their specially adapted bodies. The thought that humans lived on a world where that was just the average depth made her gills flutter with anxiety. Jake seemed to notice her discomfort and offered what might have been meant as reassurance. Don't worry, we mostly stay on the surface. Though some humans do go down to the deepest parts in special vehicles. We've found life down there that exists in conditions that would kill almost anything else. This information did not seem to comfort Ripple at all. The next image that appeared showed a massive spiral of clouds photographed from space. It looked beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like a giant eye staring up from the planet's surface. The white spiral stretched across hundreds of miles, and the eye in the center looked perfectly calm while everything around it spun in violent motion. These storm systems are common during certain seasons, Jake explained, zooming in on the hurricane. Wind speeds often exceed 150 miles per hour. The lightning strikes with the force of small nuclear reactions. The energy-sensitive spark folk, who normally glowed with a soft blue light, suddenly flickered and dimmed. They could handle enormous amounts of energy, but they absorbed it gradually over time. The idea of sudden, violent energy releases on that scale made their entire nervous systems recoil instinctively. Jake played a video clip of lightning striking during the hurricane. The bolts were massive, branching across the sky like the roots of some cosmic tree, and where they touched the ground, they left scars in the earth. The sound, even through the classroom's audio system, was deafening. Professor Veltan's voice carried a note of disbelief. Humans go outside during these storms. Several students leaned forward, certain they had misheard. Surely no intelligent species would voluntarily expose themselves to that kind of natural violence. Jake nodded as if the professor had asked whether humans enjoyed breathing. Some of us chase them for fun. We call them storm chasers. They drive vehicles directly into the path of these storms to study them up close. The silence that followed was unlike anything the lecture hall had experienced. It wasn't the polite quiet of students paying attention, or even the stunned silence of shock. It was the kind of silence that comes when every brain in the room is trying to process information that doesn't quite make sense. The insectoid hive mind representative began making nervous clicking sounds with her mandibles, a noise that indicated severe stress among her people. The clicks echoed slightly in the quiet hall, growing faster as she processed what she had just heard. "For fun?" asked one of the Granite Clan students, his voice sounding like rocks grinding together. "They pursue deadly storms for recreational purposes." "Well, it's also scientific research," Jake clarified helpfully. "But yeah, many of them say they enjoy the adrenaline rush. Humans tend to like activities that are a little dangerous." The cloud dancers, who existed as living gas and had never experienced physical danger in the traditional sense, began swirling faster around their designated area. Their patterns became erratic, showing confusion and distress. Professor Veltan's scales had shifted from gold to a deeper, more troubled bronze color. "What do you mean by, a little dangerous, exactly?" Jake seemed to consider the question seriously. "I guess it depends on your definition. Most humans would consider storm chasing moderately risky. It's not as dangerous as, say, free climbing mountains or swimming with large predators." The professor's scales went a shade darker. "Swimming with predators is something humans do regularly." "Oh no, not regularly," Jake said reassuringly. "That's more of a special occasion activity. Like shark diving or visiting areas where we have large carnivores. Most humans just do normal dangerous things, like driving vehicles at high speed or participating in contact sports." By now, even the students who had been completely ignoring Jake's presentation were staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to horror. The idea that humans casually engaged in activities that would be considered suicidal by most galactic species was beginning to sink in. And Jake was just getting started. Jake tapped his data pad again, and the hurricane image dissolved into something that made several students instinctively lean back in their seats. A cross-section diagram of Earth appeared, showing layers of rock and molten material beneath the surface. Red lines marked fractures that seemed to split the entire planet into giant puzzle pieces. "Our planet sits on massive floating plates that constantly shift and collide," Jake said, pointing to the moving sections with the same tone a teacher might use to explain basic mathematics. "These plates are always moving, grinding against each other. This creates what we call earthquakes and volcanic eruptions." The diagram animated, showing the plates slowly crashing into each other with tremendous force. Where they met, the crust buckled upward into mountain ranges or one plate dove beneath another, creating deep trenches. The visual was mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. "Wait," interrupted one of the quartz beings, her crystalline voice ringing with confusion. "The ground beneath your feet is unstable." "Pretty much everywhere," Jake confirmed cheerfully. "Some places are worse than others, but the whole planet is basically floating on a sea of molten rock. Sometimes that molten rock finds its way to the surface." The next video clip showed Mount Vesuvius in full eruption. Massive clouds of ash billowed thousands of feet into the air while rivers of glowing orange lava poured down the mountainside like liquid fire. The heat shimmer made the air itself seem to dance, and the sound was a constant, rumbling roar that seemed to come from the planet's core. "This is what we call a volcanic eruption," Jake explained matter-of-factly. "The molten rock from deep underground breaks through the surface. The temperature of that lava is around 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. The energy-based spark folk, who were comfortable with high temperatures, still flickered nervously. 2000 degrees was hot even by their standards, and they could see that the lava was destroying everything it touched. Millions of humans live directly on top of these volcanic zones, Jake continued, switching to satellite images of cities built on the slopes of mountains that were clearly volcanoes. Some of our most beautiful cities are built right next to active volcanoes. The soil is really fertile there because of all the ash from previous eruptions. Professor Veltan's tail began twitching in a way that indicated severe anxiety among his people. You build permanent settlements on unstable geological formations that could destroy them at any moment. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds dangerous, Jake said with what might have been a slight smile. But humans have been doing it for thousands of years. We've gotten pretty good at predicting when eruptions might happen. And the views are incredible. He showed images of Naples, with its stunning coastline and Mount Vesuvius looming in the background like a sleeping giant. The city was beautiful, filled with millions of people going about their daily lives while living in the shadow of a mountain that could erase them all without warning. And the seismic activity? Veltan asked, his voice now carrying a tremor of its own. Jake pulled up footage of an earthquake hitting a major city. Buildings swayed like trees in a strong wind, roads cracked open, and bridges twisted like ribbons. The sound was indescribable, a deep groaning noise as if the planet itself was in pain. We've learned to build structures that flex and bend, Jake explained as the video showed buildings designed to move with the ground rather than fight against it. When a major earthquake hits, humans just adapt and rebuild. He clicked through images of San Francisco and Tokyo, showing the same locations at different points in time. Both cities had clearly been destroyed and reconstructed multiple times, each version more advanced than the last. These cities have been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times, Jake said casually. San Francisco was completely leveled in 1906, and Tokyo has been rebuilt several times after earthquakes and other disasters. But humans just keep coming back. Boulder, the representative from the rock-based Granite clan, made a grinding noise that sounded like mountains colliding. His people were literally made of living stone, but even they abandoned entire continents after minor geological disturbances. The idea of repeatedly rebuilding in the same dangerous location was incomprehensible to his species. Your people possess no survival instincts? Boulder asked, his voice rumbling with confusion. Oh, we do, Jake assured him. We just define survival differently than most species. We don't run away from danger. We learn to live with it. Jake's next image showed Earth from space, but this time with overlays indicating radiation levels. The planet was bathed in a golden glow that looked beautiful but carried deadly implications. Then there's our star, Jake continued, and several students who had been leaning forward suddenly pushed back in their seats. It bathes our planet in radiation that would sterilize most worlds within hours. The ultraviolet radiation alone would cause fatal cellular damage to most galactic species. The collective intake of breath from dozens of different respiratory systems created a strange harmony in the lecture hall. But here's the interesting part, Jake said, pulling up images of humans lying on beaches, their skin exposed to direct sunlight. Humans actually seek out this radiation. We call it sunbathing. Many humans spend their vacation time deliberately exposing themselves to as much solar radiation as possible. The images showed people relaxing on beaches, hiking in deserts, and working in fields under the full glare of the sun. They looked peaceful, even happy, while absorbing radiation that would kill most galactic species in minutes. 3 students near the front quietly gathered their belongings and left the classroom. The amphibious tide walker looked like she might be sick, her gills fluttering rapidly as she tried to process what she was hearing. Humans require this radiation for biological processes, Jake added helpfully. Our bodies actually manufacture essential chemicals when exposed to solar radiation. Without it, we get sick. Professor Veltan's scales had now shifted to a deep bronze that was almost black, a color his species displayed only when confronted with something that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. Let me understand correctly, the professor said slowly. Humans live on an unstable world where the ground moves unpredictably, molten rock regularly breaks through the surface, massive storms carry the force of nuclear weapons, and the star overhead bathes everything in lethal radiation. That's a pretty good summary of the basics, Jake agreed. Though you haven't heard about the wildlife yet. The remaining students looked at each other with expressions of growing dread, suddenly realizing that this presentation was far from over. Jake paused for a moment, watching the faces of his audience. The lecture hall had grown incredibly quiet, and he could see that many students were still trying to process everything they had learned about Earth's hostile environment. He almost felt sorry for what he was about to show them next. Now, I should probably mention the other inhabitants of our planet, Jake said, his tone shifting to something that might have been apologetic. Humans aren't alone on Earth. The holographic display flickered, and suddenly a massive great white shark filled the space above Jake's head. The creature was frozen in mid-attack, its mouth wide open to reveal rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. Each tooth was the size of a human finger, and there were hundreds of them. The shark's black eyes looked completely emotionless, like dark holes in reality itself. Several students actually pushed their chairs backward. The image was so realistic and detailed that it felt like the predator might burst out of the hologram at any moment. This is just one of thousands of apex predators we share our planet with, Jake said with the same calm tone he had been using throughout his presentation. The great white shark can grow up to 20 feet long and has a bite force of over 4,000 pounds per square inch. The shark image rotated slowly, showing its streamlined body built for speed and killing. Its skin looked like sandpaper, and every line of its form spoke of millions of years of evolution perfecting the art of hunting. Thousands, whispered one of the cloud dancers, her gaseous form swirling anxiously. Oh yes, Jake confirmed. Earth has apex predators in every environment. Land, sea, air, even underground. The hologram shifted to show a massive grizzly bear rearing up on its hind legs. The creature stood nearly 9 feet tall, its claws extended like curved daggers. Its fur was thick and dark, and its eyes held an intelligence that was somehow more frightening than the shark's emptiness. The bear's muscles rippled under its coat, showing the incredible power contained in its massive frame. Grizzly bears, Jake explained. They can run 35 miles per hour, which is faster than most human vehicles in rough terrain. Those claws can tear through steel, and an adult male can weigh up to 800 pounds of pure muscle. The next image showed a snake coiled and ready to strike. Its body was thick as a human arm, covered in beautiful but deadly patterns. Its fangs were extended, dripping with venom, and its eyes were fixed on something just outside the holographic frame. Venomous snakes striking with lightning speed, Jake continued. Some of them can kill a human in under 30 minutes. Others cause paralysis, internal bleeding, or complete nervous system shutdown. The footage rolled automatically now, showing predator after predator. Massive crocodiles with jaws that could snap tree trunks in half. Lions with manes flowing as they charged. Polar bears that made the grizzly look small. Tigers with stripes that seemed to shift and move even when the cat was perfectly still. Crocodiles that could snap a small spacecraft in half. Jake noted as a massive saltwater crocodile performed what could only be described as a death roll, spinning its entire body while clamped onto its prey. Their bite force is actually stronger than most industrial crushing machines. The Granite Clan representative, Boulder, made a sound like rocks grinding against each other. Even his people, made of living stone, were feeling uncomfortable watching this parade of Earth's predators. But Jake wasn't finished. The hologram shifted to show something that looked almost delicate by comparison. A translucent, bell-shaped creature floating gracefully through blue water. It was strangely beautiful, almost hypnotic in its gentle movements. Humans swim in oceans with creatures like this, Jake said, gesturing to what appeared to be a harmless jellyfish. This is a box jellyfish. One sting can kill an adult human in 4 minutes. The pain is so intense that victims often go into shock before the venom finishes the job. The collective intake of breath from multiple species created an odd harmony that echoed through the lecture hall. Respiratory systems designed for different atmospheres all reacting to the same horrifying information. We've developed antidotes, Jake added helpfully, but we still swim there. Australian beaches are actually popular tourist destinations. Professor Veltan's golden scales had now turned almost completely black, a color that indicated not just fear but complete bewilderment among his people. But surely, said Ripple, the Tidewalker representative, her voice bubbling with distress, surely human young are kept away from these dangers. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Actually, our children learn to identify deadly creatures as basic education. We teach them which plants will kill them, which animals to avoid, and how to survive if they encounter them anyway. He showed images from what were clearly educational materials designed for young humans. Colorful charts showing poisonous mushrooms, venomous spiders, and dangerous marine life. Children's books with titles like, What to Do If You Meet a Bear, and Identifying Deadly Plants in Your Backyard. Human children play in environments that contain creatures capable of killing them, Jake continued matter-of-factly. They learn early how to coexist with danger. The insectoid hive mind representative had stopped clicking entirely. Her mandibles hung open in a way that suggested complete system overload. Professor Veltan's voice was barely a whisper when he finally managed to speak. How do your young survive to adulthood? The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Every student in the lecture hall was leaning forward, desperate to understand how any species could possibly reproduce successfully under such impossible conditions. Jake considered the question seriously, as if he had never really thought about it before. Most do, he replied simply. The ones who don't teach the rest of us what not to do. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single student moved, breathed audibly, or made any sound whatsoever. They were all staring at Jake as if he had just told them that humans routinely jumped into black holes for entertainment. We call it natural selection, Jake added helpfully. It's been working pretty well for us so far. 3 more students quietly gathered their belongings and left the classroom, moving slowly as if they were in shock. The remaining students continued to stare at Jake with expressions that ranged from awe to terror to complete incomprehension. And somehow, Jake got the feeling that his presentation was having exactly the effect he had hoped for. Jake took a deep breath and looked out at the remaining students in the lecture hall. About a third of his original audience had quietly left during his presentation, but those who stayed seemed frozen in their seats, waiting to hear what could possibly come next after learning about Earth's unstable geology, lethal weather, deadly radiation, and countless predators. So you might be wondering, Jake said, his voice carrying a note of something that could have been pride, how humans managed to become a spacefaring species when our own planet seems determined to kill us at every opportunity. His final slide appeared, and this time the holographic display filled with dozens of images showing human settlements in the most impossible places imaginable. Arctic research stations buried under tons of snow, where the temperature outside would freeze exposed skin in seconds. Desert cities rising like mirages from sand dunes where the daytime heat could kill a person through dehydration in hours. Mountain villages perched on peaks so high that the air contained barely enough oxygen to sustain life. Humans live everywhere on our planet, Jake explained, gesturing to each image as it cycled through. From regions where the air is too thin to breathe properly, to places where the temperature can kill you in minutes, to areas where the ground itself wants to swallow you whole. One image showed humans living in a region called Death Valley, where ground temperatures regularly exceeded 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Another displayed research teams working in Antarctica, where the wind chill could drop below -100 degrees. There were floating cities on oceans filled with predators, underground communities in cave systems, and settlements built directly on the slopes of active volcanoes. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the usual background sounds of different species breathing, humming, or clicking had stopped entirely. Every student was staring at the holographic display with expressions of complete disbelief. You see, Jake continued, we're not the strongest species in the galaxy. That would probably be you, he nodded toward Boulder and the other Granite Clan representatives. We're not the fastest, he gestured toward the energy-based spark folk, or the smartest individually, acknowledging the crystalline quartz beings with their vast computational abilities. But our planet taught us something valuable, Jake said, and his voice carried a note of something deeper now, something that spoke of countless generations of humans facing impossible odds and refusing to give up. It taught us how to survive anything. The next series of images showed humans doing things that defied logic for any reasonable species. Rescue workers running directly toward natural disasters while everyone else fled in the opposite direction. Emergency responders wading into flood waters to save strangers, firefighters charging into burning buildings, medical teams working in the middle of disease outbreaks that would terrify most galactic species into quarantine. When disaster strikes, Jake explained, humans don't run away. We run toward the problem. We've evolved to see danger as something to overcome rather than something to avoid. The footage shifted to show human explorers venturing into the deepest ocean trenches in tiny submarines, climbing the highest mountain peaks despite deadly weather conditions, and spelunking through cave systems that hadn't seen sunlight for millions of years. Every image showed humans pushing into environments that other species would consider instantly lethal. We explore places that could kill us just to see what's there, Jake said simply. We climb mountains because they exist. We dive to the deepest parts of our oceans because we want to know what lives down there. We go into space not because it's safe, but because it's the next challenge. Then came the images that really drove the point home. Human colonies on worlds that other species had marked as uninhabitable. Settlements thriving on planets with toxic atmospheres, extreme gravity, or radiation levels that should have been instantly fatal. Humans adapting to environments that the rest of the galaxy had written off as hopeless. Every world the galactic community has ever marked as uninhabitable due to environmental hazards, Jake said, humans have looked at and said, that looks like home. Professor Veltan made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a groan. His people were known for their careful, methodical approach to colonization. They spent decades studying potential worlds before even sending unmanned probes. The worlds you settle, Veltan said slowly, the ones we consider death worlds, are usually less dangerous than Earth, Jake confirmed with a slight smile. Most of the colony worlds humans have settled are actually vacation destinations compared to our home planet. Jake clicked to his final image, which showed Earth from space again. But this time, instead of looking peaceful and blue-green, it looked different somehow. The swirling clouds looked more ominous, the continents seemed scarred by geological activity, and the whole planet radiated a sense of barely contained violence. Earth didn't just create humans, Jake concluded, his voice carrying absolute conviction. It forged us. Every earthquake taught us to build stronger. Every storm taught us to predict weather patterns. Every predator taught us to be smarter, faster, more resourceful. Every disaster taught us to help each other survive. He paused, looking out at his audience one more time. We're not the most advanced species in the galaxy, he said. We're not the most intelligent, or the strongest, or the most technologically sophisticated. But we are the most stubborn. Earth spent millions of years trying to kill us, and we just kept coming back stronger. Jake powered down the holographic display, and Earth faded away, leaving only the normal lighting of the lecture hall. When other species encounter a problem they can't solve, they adapt to work around it, he said quietly. When humans encounter a problem we can't solve, we keep throwing ourselves at it until either we break it or it breaks us. And we're very hard to break. Professor Veltan's scales had shifted to deep purple, a color his species displayed only in the presence of something they deeply respected and feared. His voice was barely audible when he spoke. Class dismissed, Veltan whispered. The students began filing out slowly, moving like people who had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. Conversations were muted, and more than one species was casting nervous glances back at Jake as if he might suddenly reveal some other terrifying aspect of human existence. As Jake gathered his materials, he overheard one of the quartz beings muttering to her companion in a voice like crystal chimes, "No wonder they're spreading to every world in the galaxy. They're not explorers or colonists. Her companion completed the thought in an equally crystalline whisper, "They're survivors." Jake smiled to himself as he headed for the exit. For the first time since humans had joined the galactic community, he had the feeling that his species wouldn't be underestimated anymore. Outside the lecture hall, he could already hear students talking in hushed, worried tones about the implications of sharing the galaxy with a species that had been literally forged by a Deathworld. And somehow, Jake thought, that was probably exactly how it should be.